to today's episode of Carbon Experts Live, brought to you by One Click LCA. I am your host, Abigail Mella. Thank you for joining us. Today, I am very excited to be joined by two legitimate leaders in sustainability in the built environment. The first is Ida Namur, the Vice President of Global Sustainability Programs at AECOM, the global infrastructure and building consulting firm, as well as Panu Pasanen, the CEO and founder of One Click LCA, the end-to-end sustainability platform for construction and related manufacturing. Ida and Panu, welcome.
Thank you.
So in today's episode, we are going to discuss decarbonizing by design, and we're going to look at AECOM's global sustainability initiatives and program, the impact of advanced platforms like One Click LCA to optimize global decarbonization strategies and workflows, how to effectively guide clients toward sustainable practices, and we'll also get into the future of sustainability. I think this is going to be a very exciting show. So let's dive in and get started. As a quick note, Carbon Experts Live is a program brought to you by One Click LCA, the global end-to-end sustainability platform for construction projects and products, with the mission to power the makers of a zero carbon future. And you can learn more at oneclicklca.com. So I am so excited to introduce you to Ida Namur. Ida is a certified environmental professional who specializes in sustainability consulting and global program implementation. She has more than 20 years of experience working with private sector companies and government agencies, both inside of the United States and outside. And in her role as the Vice President of Global Sustainability Programs at AECOM, she actually leads the development and implementation of Scope X, which is AECOM's approach to decarbonizing the projects that it delivers for its clients. And we'll talk a bit more about Scope X moving forward. But first, I just want to say, Ida, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'd also like to introduce you to Panu Pasanen. He is the CEO and sole founder of One Click LCA, which is the world's leading end-to-end sustainability platform for construction and related manufacturing, which was founded in 2001 in Helsinki, Finland. Panu has extensive experience in life cycle assessment, embodied carbon, and sustainability, and he regularly collaborates with governments and corporations to advance regulation and policies for effective decarbonization. And he's driven to create user-friendly, automated, and robust life cycle assessment and other sustainability software to scale this mission. Panu, thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
Good. So I have very exciting news to share with all of you who have joined today. Forbes actually broke the news just a few hours ago, but for those of you who have not yet heard, AECOM has signed a multi-year global agreement with One Click LCA to enhance AECOM's Scope X approach for achieving a 50% carbon reduction on major client projects. And this partnership allows AECOM to leverage One Click LCA's comprehensive carbon and sustainability solutions to scale up AECOM's decarbonization efforts across their project portfolio and to demonstrate measurable impact worldwide. So I first just want to say to Ida and also to Panu, congratulations to both of you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And in today's talk, we're also going to discuss what this agreement means. And I think this will be of quite great interest for all of you that are dialing in today. And without further ado, let's get started. That said, note that we're going to host a live question and answer segment at the end of today's show. And you can already start dropping your questions for Ida and Panu in the comment section now. maybe with a note that we're going to prioritize the most thoughtful and sort of substantive questions to be first in the queue. And Ida has said she would really like to extend the amount of time that we typically offer for live Q&A. I think this is very exciting for all of you. So please start dropping your questions now. We have a very full house today, and you want to be sure to get your question to Ida and Panu. So I will now turn to you first, Ida, and ask you just to tell us more about who you are, your work leading global sustainability programs at AECOM, and maybe tell everyone in the audience what they should know in brief about AECOM.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abigail. You did a really nice job introducing me in the first place. So I guess I will just add that now I'm originally from Norway, but I've been based in the US for almost 25 years now. I worked my whole career in the consulting field, really focusing on sustainability, climate mitigation, and then in various roles at AECOM, doing strategic leadership and operations management. I've been with AECOM for 17 years. And my current responsibility is all focused on how we decarbonize the projects that we deliver for our clients, which we're calling Scope X. And I know we're going to get into that a lot more. From an AECOM perspective, we're a global Fortune 500 company headquartered in the US. We're a leading infrastructure consulting firm, and we really focus on professional services delivered across the life cycle. So from advisory and planning to design to construction management and program management as well. And our projects are across markets from transportation, buildings, water, new energy, and environment. And our clients in both the public and private sector environment really come to us for their most complex challenges.
That's great. Thank you. And Panu, we'll turn to you. Tell the audience a bit about who you are. You are the sole founder and CEO of One Click LCA, which is quite interesting. And I know that you're really driven to scale sustainability and decarbonization. So maybe you can touch on this idea of scaling things globally.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I'm a software engineer and working in sustainability field almost quarter of a decade now. So, more maybe sustainability expert as of today than a software expert. That was my early career. And obviously with software, what you can do is you can scale stuff. But to be able to scale stuff, you need to be sure that people can use it in practice, they can understand it, and they can deploy it in the right way. And to do that, you have to build much more than a software. And you, of course, have to work with people to help them implement it. And that's what it's about. Like, so powering the makers of a zero carbon future, that's One Click LCA's mission. And AECOM, for one, is one of the leaders in here as the makers of a zero carbon future. And we are very proud to be working with Ida and her team and every other team, for that matter, at AECOM to support this decarbonization effort. And it takes a lot of leaders, and it also takes a lot of followers. So let's get on with it.
So Ida, I'll pass the ball to you now and ask you at length maybe to talk about AECOM's current sustainability efforts. And this could also lead you to discuss the role of digital tooling to enable these initiatives. And I think you and Panu maybe will have a lot to discuss here, but
Yeah, absolutely. So AECOM, we had our corporate emissions reduction target verified by the Science Based Target Initiative back in April 2020. We were actually the first US-based company of our kind to get our targets verified. And when we're talking about AECOM emissions, we're talking about scope 1, 2, and 3 operational emissions, which is direct emissions from things that AECOM own, which is buildings and vehicles to some extent. We have the indirect emissions from energy that we buy for our lease spaces. And then we have scope 3, which is our indirect emissions from everything else, like business travel, things that we buy for ourselves, materials and services that we buy for our projects, and then employee commuting. And when we were really going through that and looking at our emissions, we realized, as a company, we actually don't emit that much carbon. But what we are able to influence, although we can't control it, is emissions that are resulting from services that we deliver. So beyond scope 3, really the indirect emissions they're resulting from the services that we deliver. And we call that scope X. So beyond scope 1, 2, and 3. And so for the past several years, we've been really working to develop and then now implement this approach, which is really around programmatically collaborating with our clients and partners across the enterprise to really think about carbon management and decarbonization services early in scope conversations with our customers. It's all about deploying methods and technology tools on our projects to make sure that we're able to understand where the carbon opportunities are and then make suggestions for lower carbon solutions. And I do want to emphasize here that decarbonization is not really new to AECOM. Like, we have many years experience decarbonizing projects for our clients and significant expertise within our organization. But what is new is the global programmatic approach. And so we're looking to move from decarbonization as a specialized service to one that's becoming embedded in our work as business as usual. The other thing I want to point out that is that we have designed our program to be aligned with PAS 2080 or PAS 2080, which is a carbon management framework that aligns responsibility for carbon emissions with the value chain. So depending on the role that you have in facilitating development of an infrastructure built asset, that's what assigns responsibility for carbon. And it requires quantification of carbon reduction targets, baseline and reduction measures. And that's really where the tools and data come in. And it's one of the main reasons for this expanded partnership with One Click. We've been partnering with One Click for years, but this new partnership and this expanded partnership is really necessary for us to be able to scale up that effort. And Panu, maybe I'll hand it off to you here. Talk a little bit more about that, how you're going to help us expand it.
Yeah, of course. So ICOM is a global company, right? So a lot of themes, corporate language being, English and all that, but customers, they work differently. They have their own regulations. They look at certain things in a different way. So what we provide is we provide a global platform which can still comply with, local standards in all the different jurisdictions. So you go to Hong Kong or you go to, Asia, you do Australia, you do Canada, Europe, US, anywhere. There's going to be some differences in the standards that are going to be applied at the local level, but those don't actually, in One Click LCA's architecture, contradict using a global unified approach as an overlay on top of that. So you can actually serve customers with local standards, with local data, local approach, but still be consistent in a global management framework such as PAS 2080. And I think that's probably important. The other thing, of course, is the design data. So you design a lot of very complex projects. So maybe you could talk about how BIM is part of that.
Yeah, so I think the reason that that we were so attracted to One Click as a company was because it not only could allow us to scale internationally because of your robust data platform, but it also could cover the kinds of different projects that we're working on. So we're currently decarbonizing a lot in the built environment, in the building space, but our transportation sector are increasingly looking for more solutions. So we needed a platform of tools that were able to look at decarbonization both in building projects and in transportation projects. And I think the other critical factor is that working with One Click allows us to better integrate into existing workflows, which is critical, and then in turn allows us to collect data from our projects that we can eventually aggregate across our project portfolio so we can be able to understand what the real impact is of decarbonization across the business.
Yeah, I agree. And also one big part of this is bringing a lot of people on board and making sure everybody understands this. So one stepping stone on the way that we did was creating this infrastructure LCA course, which is freely available for everybody going forward, which was created together with ICOM, and obviously to power your makers of zero carbon future, but also everybody else's, because we need everybody, all hands on board for this. So that's a great way to multiply the impact that we have directly scope backs in terms of how far we go beyond the work we do together to power others. So nice multiplier there.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of our, and to the other point, how One Click is helping us deliver decarbonization. Some of our clients are already using One Click for their projects. It makes sense to use that. And in other areas, we have flexibility to choose the tool that's most appropriate for the task. And I think we have two user groups of One Click that there is a specialization required. It's not a tool that everyone can use. They require significant training. And so we have a set of carbon practitioners who are very excited to increase their use of One Click. And we are already seeing almost double the users of One Click since we rolled out this agreement, which is super exciting. Then there's another piece that's very interesting, and it's how do we enable people who are maybe not going to be full-time carbon modelers, help them make better decisions at the project earlier in the project lifecycle and really scale it up that way, that more general upskilling.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the new tools we brought on board, of course, is the materials compass, but that's just one of the tools, and there's a lot of different ways to go about it for the non-experts.
Panu, maybe you could chat about what is materials compass for those in the audience who don't know what that means or what that is.
Yeah. So you're an architect, you're a designer, you want to design sustainable, but you don't actually know LCA and you don't understand what are sustainable materials and what is a sustainable materials. So materials compass integrates all the world's reliable sustainability data for products, carbon data in particular. It allows you to find that data, see what data is available from suppliers close to where you work, and you can compare them, and then you can create specification lists and that kind of things. And you don't have to understand LCA. You'll be just working on the materials, and maybe that's your contribution to the project, and then there's going to be others who integrate that into a holistic design and lifecycle assessment. But I mean, still somebody has to look at finishes and many other things. And not every decision has to be powered by LCA, but it's very useful to have every decision powered by data.
Absolutely. Yeah. And consistent data across all the tools that we use. That's the other critical part.
Yeah.
And Ida, this it's quite interesting. You mentioned there's been a 2x increase in the number of your team members that are using One Click LCA internally. What has fueled that adoption internally, and how have you gotten people excited within AECOM to start using this new tool?
Yeah, I think this was something that has been brewing for a while. So we had, and I know this is not just an issue for AECOM, but a bunch of companies like us have too many carbon assessment tools. Too many people develop their own tools. There's clients that require us to use specific tools, and there's a bunch of different kinds of tools in the marketplace. So we had, upwards tens and maybe not hundreds. We don't have hundreds of tools, but we had so many, and people were really ready for a little bit more simplified way of looking at a tool. That's one reason why. The way that we were working with One Click before was very regionally specific. So everyone would just be asking for the specific module that they needed for their specific task. But this new enterprise agreement has allowed us access to all of the tools. So now we have existing users that are able to talk to their colleagues and say, oh, you're able to use a different tool now we have full access to. So it's both something where we had a need already for a tool that we weren't able to fill with our existing tools. And then the other one is just more availability for existing tools that's part of One Click's platform. People are sort of primed for that as well.
Yeah, including Iceland as of quite recently, so Norway's neighbor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the bigger countries we got covered quite a few years ago. Yeah, but that's obviously very important, and it's very tedious to manage so many different tools because you have difficulty often patching together data. So that's another thing. So because the data is created consistently, you can also pull it out consistently, and then you know what's going on in your business.
Absolutely. And I think this is another thing. There's a lot of really great industry work being done here, but I think the inconsistency of carbon assessments is a real problem. We have people doing carbon assessment at scale, but without sufficient standardization in the industry. So the more people that are able to use similar data sets, similar tools, similar approaches, similar assumptions, the more certain we can be that the calculations that we make and the assessment that we base our advice on is actually correct and valid.
Panu, maybe you can talk about integrations and integrations with industry tools that make workflow easier for folks in AECOM or other to adopt.
Yeah, Yeah, I will just talk about this from a technical angle because the process angle is maybe better answered by Ida. But so, you use typically quite different tools in different stages of a project. So you want to think about how you would go about something. You might use just a concept study work, cost tables, or you might do some costing of a project. So you do not very likely design something in the first place. So from a technical point of view, then what we do have is we have this kind of tool called Carbon Designer 3D, which allows you to generate prototype building very easy in a couple of clicks, and in about 2 or 3 minutes you can run various alternatives for that kind of thing, just to get a sense of where will you end, where will you end at if you go this way or that way or so on, and that allows for a discussion with your customer and project stakeholders which way you want to go, right? And then you have to engage one design direction. So by that time, you need to know if you're going to do mass timber, you're going to do steel, you're going to do concrete, or whatever. A service building, right? And at that point, you need to engage somebody to design. And then we have these early phase tools like Rhino, Grasshopper, Dynamo, whatnot. And then you move to the bigger scale tools like Bentley or Revit and Trimble, which are then used for detailed design. And we can integrate with all of these. And the point there is that while you work with somehow different tools in the different stages, you can still run the assessment consistently. Of course, the resolution changes from very rough to very detailed in the meantime. But how does it look like in your process, Ida? Like in your business, this different workflows, how do you look at carbon across the stages of life cycle of a project?
Yeah. So as part of the ScopeX approach, we've developed a methods and workflow that's based on asset type and stage of life cycle development. So this is still a work in progress, but we've developed it for some of our major assets that we work on, including buildings, wastewater, and then several transportation assets. So what we have done there is we have built out a step-by-step guide for practitioners, and it could be people that are non-experts as well, that really outlines who needs to be engaged, what are the individual steps, what sort of data do you need to collect, and what are the appropriate tools, depending on the type of assets that you're working on, where you are in the life cycle of the asset. Is it a planning project? Is it a design, construction management, or operation and maintenance? And then what is the scope of the carbon? So depending on whether you are looking at whole life carbon, so both embodied and operational, or you're looking at just operational carbon and just embodied, it will guide you to a different kind of workflow. And then that's backed up by a 5-pager guide, again, meant to be understood by people who are not necessarily carbon experts, but who are project managers or technical leaders, who are able then to navigate this process in a consistent way. So whether you're working in the UK or you're working in the US or in Hong Kong, you will be able to have a consistent way of executing a carbon assessment and some guidance around tools.
Yeah, that sounds great. And obviously, like managing a wastewater project is completely different to a building. So I assume the handover between the final customer happens with very different steering mechanism. How do you does the buy-in work in the same way? Do you get similar response from clients in water industry and building industry?
Get the same buy-in from the clients, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that also varies, not only by sector, but where you are in the world. And so I think it really comes back to having these conversations early on, and then to understand where our clients are on their decarbonization journey and what sort of pressures for and against measuring carbon exists for them. Like that's the other, it seems maybe like it makes sense. Like, of course you should talk about carbon, but I don't think we do that enough. We just read the RFP, the request for proposal, and then we provide the best response to that we possibly can, right? So what are we doing different now is we're asking questions that we weren't asking before about an RFP. So we have an ongoing project in the middle of the United States where that is not, it's not a given that sustainability is built in to the bid. So we're saying, okay, well, I know that you have a net zero target by 2050. You have this interim target by 2030. If you're going to build a major sewer tunnel you need to consider carbon. Like, if you don't do that, then you're not on your pathway to 2050. And I think that's somewhere we can have a bigger influence because it's easier to make the goals than it is to actually reach it. And I think um, just having the conversation where you educate your client, it's not necessarily more expensive to consider carbon. Yeah, you might need to do a little bit more effort upfront to evaluate the best options and taking carbon into consideration. But at the end of the day, if you reduce material quantity or you're doing something a different way, actually many times it reduces costs. And that's a really easy way to engage people in that conversation.
Yeah. One thing we also try to do is we try to highlight process where people have done something well. But surprisingly enough, some people don't want to, share their best practices. So how do you get on with that? Are you getting any, customers to share their good practice so that, others can apply them more? Or the carbon management, is it like a state secret? How do we manage carbon?
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think it varies again what type of client it is. Some people are very excited to come out and talk to us about it. I think one example is the Toronto Pearson Airport in Canada. We've been engaged with them on design, not only coming up with helping them design their net zero strategy, but helping with some of the implementation as well. And they've been willing to talk about it. We may have some other clients, maybe government clients who are not as excited to be on the record, or some big tech clients that are fine with us sharing the good work that we're doing, but not who it is. That's definitely, that could be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, but of course, what's important here is that we find enough of the case studies to make it tangible for as many as possible. So, like that's also, I think, important part, and we are happy to highlight any cases that you'll create during the years to come. So definitely important part of the work. If we come back to the cost angle, so I mean, we are obviously, like, often when you look at materials consumption and materials carbon impacts from a different angle, and not just your business as usual angle, you may think to a different pathway of questioning, like, what do I put this thing there for? What is it? What is the purpose, right? So how do those conversations go? Are customers willing to change from the way you do things historically sometimes, or how do you get them to buy into to changing the pathway?
It's all about data, I think, for most of our clients. They want to see evidence. Case studies is very helpful, but the being able to connect cost and carbon is critically important. And we've been able to do that in some cases. I think there's still more work to do in the industry to pull that, but I think that's a critical piece, because we need to get from not only tying cost and carbon to the different scenarios that we're looking at, but also recognizing that there is a cost of not considering carbon. Right? That maybe goes a little bit beyond that. But if you don't design something that's resilient for the future, or that does not consider mitigating climate change, then you're actually setting yourself up for failure, and it's going to cost you a lot longer, a lot more in the long run. I think that's a piece that we could emphasize a little bit more.
Yeah. Do your clients worry about stranded assets a lot? Like, is that part of the way you have this conversation? Like, that I'm going to have this asset which nobody wants to touch in 10 years because of the emissions it has?
It might be. I don't have specific examples that come to mind there, but I'm sure we have a whole group that looks at portfolio decarbonization, and that is has to be part of that conversation for sure.
Yeah. Great.
All right, let's move to the next question. I think we've exhausted the topic, and I think I would really encourage both of you to, envision a future, and the sustainability attached to that future, and where are we headed, based on sort of your current vantage point and your forecast for what's to come, based on, Ida, what you're seeing on the ground, Panu, what you're seeing with, like, all of the data. And maybe I'll pass this first to Ida. Do you want to take this first? What is the future of sustainability, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So I mean, I've been passionate about climate mitigation and sustainability my whole life. Like, I decided to become an environmental scientist as 12. and I wanted to move to the United States because, we can have as many electric cars as we want in Norway, but it's really when the United States changes the way that they work that things are really going to change in the world. It's not just the US, obviously, but that's one of the major drivers for change. I will say part of me is a little bit worried that we're still having conversations about whether or not sustainability should be considered at the same level as cost and return on investment. Um, like the definition of sustainability is to be able to meet the needs of now without compromising the needs of the future. I mean, and that's from 1987 and coined by former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. So I feel like that's settled. It should be settled. So it's a little disheartening when we're having conversations that kind of question the validity of that. But on the other hand, the drive from people, governments, and businesses to address it as a climate emergency and making that commitment to net zero goals and being able to talk about the challenges that are around getting there, revisiting their scenarios, being able to really work at it, it does make me hopeful that we're able to make sustainability given and actually be able to take action in a timely manner so that we can avoid the greatest disasters of climate change. So I guess like a sort of optimistic but slightly concerned, I think.
Yeah, so if I answer it from a completely different angle, actually two different points of angle, but one at a time. So we can look at this from roughly 3 points of view, right? So one of them is compliance. We have to do these certain things because these regulations will not allow us to get a new building permit. They will not be eligible for the green mortgages, whatever. So that's very standards driven, regulations driven, do this or else. And that's really great actually, because that means that you don't have to be a leader. So, but for the markets which are not regulated to work on sustainability, then we need this kind of voluntary, metric driven, performance driven work on carbon, maybe broader life cycle assessment and other things. But then there's the third way of looking at it, and that's looking at it as a source of growth, right? I mean, almost entire engineering construction industry is working as a business. Obviously, we have a bit of government in there as final customer, but this is a business for almost all of us, right? And you want to have something that you can grow your business with for the future, because obviously, maybe the oil and gas gigs will go down at some point, right? I mean, or whatever, right? So, using sustainability for business growth, that I think is going to be the much bigger part of this, because this is like a really long-term challenge. This is a really big challenge, and there's going to be a lot of work needed. So, moving a bit less from compliance to the carbon management, and then ultimately mostly the growth, because carbon management has to become part of the daily work routines for many of us.
This is a bit off script to ask you this, but I would be curious kind of globally where you see compliance and regulation is very strong. And then maybe also where you see this sort of voluntary sort of carbon market opt-in and where that's very strong. Like where is the future of sustainability globally? I'll let either of you take that.
Well, if I start, so like we in the Nordics, we like to obey to the rules. So it's always a good place to start with regulations. So Nordics is definitely all the Nordic countries have carbon regulations now for built assets, and then you go to France. There has to be a law for everything, right? Done. Benelux broadly similar, and then it starts to get more scattered. So you can have that in London, you can have that in Vancouver, you can have that in Toronto, but then it gets more difficult to get it politically done statewide. But of course, the big needle mover for this industry is going to be European Union's Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which mandates every country to come up with life cycle carbon reduction plans by 27, which are going to be legally binding then 2 years later.
Yeah, I'll add. But then before, I just want to address one thing. So we keep talking about carbon, and I know that's our mission here today, but the question is around sustainability. So I do want to acknowledge that sustainability is bigger than just carbon. Carbon is sort of it's measurable, it's tip of the spear. It's a little bit easier to wrap your mind around than social value and some of the other things. But I hear that a lot. Like, we shouldn't have carbon tunnel vision. That's something I hear. It's not, but sustainability is considering carbon among other things. So just wanted to make sure that we're clear on that. From policy is critical, right? Like, without policy, we can't get stuff done fast enough. And so we have to be more innovative with policy. I do think the United States implementation of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is significant, and it's going to make a huge difference. That is the biggest commitment to energy transition that we've seen. And some of the associated, the IIJA, some of the regulations there on the federal side. We're also seeing leadership at the state level in the United States. And so as that becomes more and more successful, we'll see more adoption, I think, more broadly. But again, it's not, federal policy makes things happen more quickly, but that is a little bit more difficult to get done in a place like the United States.
Yeah, great. So if I then open my other point of view, so carbon tunnel vision, exactly. So like kilowatt hours, we've been counting since the oil crisis. So 73, all of a sudden we know that we actually consume quantities of energy, not just some infinite energy that never runs out. Then we figured out there's going to be a CO2 associated with those kilowatt hours, and then later it becomes a slice of carbon. So carbon one aspect, great. But then material cycle. So construction and demolition waste is like half of the waste in European Union, maybe a bit less in China, but in here, for example, it's just exactly half, and it's also half of the raw material consumption. So these are like massive material flows. So circularity is much harder to put to practice though, because there's contradictory regulations which make it harder to advance. And then we have these critical but more emerging topics like health impacts and biodiversity. We are also working on both, and we are also working on making both quantifiable, obviously, because of if you need to make trade-offs, you need to be able to understand what's the impact of those trade-offs. But we don't have evidence yet that those are mainstream ready, but we do have to tackle those. Social impact, we haven't even started there yet, so attempting to quantify that is.
Yeah.
So, but another important area, and it's hard, right? Like integrating all these points of view into a single project and getting your customer to sign off on it. I mean, it requires a lot of data, it requires a lot of planning, a lot of trade-offs to be considered.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But we'll get there.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. We're ready to move to our 3 takeaways segment of today's Carbon Experts Live program. And Ida, I would actually like to pass the 3 takeaways to you. If you could share these in your own words and maybe flesh them out with a bit more context, we'd just love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as we've been talking about, decarbonization is most actionable when decisions are made early in the life cycle process about, depending on the asset, it depends, but in general, about, more than half of the decisions around carbon are made in the planning and advisory process. And the second one is that the best way to scale carbon management is to integrate decarbonization into existing workflows. We have to make it easy for people. This is something we're tackling here. Automation goes along with it. We can't expect people to do double the work. We have to integrate it with what they're doing already. So that's critical. And then collaboration with industry is critical. There are very important conversations happening right now in the industry, including with what I'm going to affectionately call our frenemies. We're fierce competitors, but we all recognize the need to come together around a common approach to carbon management and carbon attribution. How do we account for the carbon emission that we contribute to as designers and advisors? We need to do that in order to best serve our clients and our community. So that is my third takeaway of today.
Panu, any final thoughts before we move on to the live Q&A segment?
Well, not a takeaway from here, but just to put it in context, what this means, like if you are an AC professional, you can change your lifestyle personally to be a low carbon lifestyle. But if you change your profession and what you do at the office to be low carbon, your impact is about 1,000 times larger. That's how important it is. And let's get on this.
That's a really good one. I like that one.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Let's move on. So One Click LCA is the world-leading sustainability software for construction and related manufacturing. It's used in 170 countries with Bentley, Autodesk, Tekla, and 20 other top software integrations for seamless use with your team's existing workflows. And with One Click LCA, project teams around the world can design and deliver net zero and circular projects. They can compare the impact of design options. They can find and select eco-friendly materials in the cloud. They can use this to differentiate and achieve carbon reductions, comply with 80 different certifications and regulations worldwide, and not to mention access the world's largest database of construction lifecycle assessments. In sum, One Click LCA exists to power the makers of a zero carbon future. Panu referenced this earlier. This is our company mission. And we enable this with intuitive and cyber-secure, cloud-based sustainability platform that can handle very complex global needs at scale. So before moving into the live Q&A with Ida and Panu, I would love to give you the opportunity to receive a free custom consultation to learn more about how One Click LCA can help you decarbonize at scale. So if you're live streaming today's event, you will see a poll pop up right now asking if you want our sales team to contact you to schedule a free custom consultation to learn more about how we can enable you to meet your sustainability strategy commitments. If you would like the free consultation, click yes in the poll. If you are not ready for a sales consultation, just click no. And instead, you can visit our website, oneclicklca.com, to explore more about our sustainability solutions at your leisure. All of this said, thank you so much. And now it is time to segue into the live Q&A session with Ida and Panu. So the first question comes from Melissa, and it reads, how does One Click LCA balance the need for detailed environmental impact data with user-friendly design, ensuring it remains accessible across industries?
Well, maybe I start. So we provide prioritization of data, so we'll provide the users always the data that is most relevant for them, and that means that's the most matching of what they are looking for, or that's also the most local, right? So I mean, most of the materials don't travel very well from economical and from carbon point of view. So we put a lot of attention in providing the most relevant data. So I mean, it would be pretty tedious to search through every steel supplier in the world when you are clear where you're building and what you need. And the other thing we do is, of course, we also abstract the specific materials to standard designs. So you don't always know what materials you want to use. You just are going to look for a design. So for example, if you want to do a gypsum board wall, we have a huge library of this kind of standard construction assemblies, which are simplified for the earlier. But maybe, Ida, how does it look like to you? Like something to add there?
No, I think you answered it. I think it's a good question. There is a need to balance that you have to leverage the data you have at the time. So our effort is to enable people to make better decisions earlier on, maybe when you have less data, and then over time be able to refine that and continue to revisit to make sure that the design is still valid.
Good. Yeah, let's take the next question. This comes from Edith. Ooh, interesting. How do you think artificial general intelligence might affect sustainable development? Panu, you've been talking about AI a lot lately. I'm going to pass this to you first. This is a hardball question.
Well, partly it makes sustainable design and any design faster and allows you to consider more options. So it can allow you to, improve that. It doesn't tell you the direction, right? So you actually have to set design objectives for AI as you have to set design objectives for a human designer, right? they don't work in isolation. So if you tell the AI that find me the fastest way to knock up a project, I mean, it won't do any good for your carbon, most likely the opposite. But if you ask for a design that is optimized for cost and carbon, it's going to be more powerful over time than doing the whole thing just with human design. But both need to be, used. Then if we move into the broader question and not just how it affects design process, then obviously one thing it can do, if this goes in a desirable way that removes the barriers, like that it actually will be possible to literally scale this to almost everything. That would be very desirable, but there are of course also some negative scenarios which might come about from use of AI. But yeah, so more on the positive side, clearly, from where we stand.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, AI is something that we're considering with every development that we do. And we're currently with ScopeX, we have this thing called ScopeX Portal, which is our platform where we're collecting our results. And now we're using AI to summarize lengthy case studies. So our people are able to more quickly grasp the relevant decarbonization strategies that they can apply to their projects. And that way it's pretty simple. It's a large language model that works pretty well. I think in the future, we're going to be able to have AI help us do other things more quickly, like LCAs, perhaps a little bit more quickly. But on the other side, using AI requires a lot of energy. So I do think we need to be a little bit critical with how we're using it. My understanding is like if you ask it dumb questions, it uses more energy or something. Like you have to be smart with how you use AI. So it's a net positive. I totally agree with you there, but we have to be considerate with how we apply it.
Kelly asks, how is extended service life considered in materials selection, and what data is required for qualification? For example, epoxy-coated rebar versus traditional rebar.
I'll leave that to Panu. That's not a big question.
Okay, so when you are doing an LCA, there are two different ways you can do it, right? So one of them is if you are doing it for compliance purposes. Let's say you are following a certain standard, let's say for a country. Often those standards actually set you the service life that you have to use. And they typically don't allow you to distinguish between this kind of finishings. Like they don't have that level of resolution. Fine. So that's outside of the regulated cases. Then you are allowed to use manufacturer service lives or other service lives that have been assessed. And there you actually need to bring in your expertise, right? So AECOM builds a lot of infra. So there's bridges, there's this kind of things which are having salination, which are having freezing, a lot of different pressures. And if you want to compare steel and concrete, pillars for a bridge in such conditions, that's a real engineering thing, right? You need to actually understand what you're doing and what are the pressures going to be. So sometimes you can just use manufacturer data that may go for some of the more simple things, but then in others you actually need to be like a professional of that thing. Obviously, for the bridges, they are extreme examples and huge safety factor. If the bridge collapses, I mean, like that's kind of the worst possible thing that you have. So then those kind of considerations are done with huge care. But then if you estimate carpet's life cycle off by 3 years, I mean, probably it's not going to be a big drama effect. So you can rely on manufacturer claims or that kind of things a bit more on, let's say, the less life critical things. But typically, every structural material, you need to have a structural engineer's point of view.
Thanks, Panu. Next up, John asks, regarding resolution changes during project stages, as timber, steel, or concrete, can you explain the benefits of detailed assessments later after initial big decisions based on a rough model?
You want to start, Panu, or want me to start?
You start.
Yeah, so I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's saying, well, if you made the big decisions when you had less information earlier on, are there benefits of doing more detailed assessments later? And I would say yes, absolutely. I think we keep saying we need to have better decisions earlier, but that does not negate the need to do detailed assessments as we get more information, because decisions can be modified and with a potentially significant impact. So just because the majority of the big decisions around carbon are made earlier in the process doesn't mean it's not worth it to rework that model later. And a perfect example, I think, is around operational emissions. So even though once you've designed something completely, yeah, you may have less impact in the overall whole life carbon emissions for that specific asset, but the operation of a building can be 60 to 100 years. So every little bit of carbon that you can save makes a huge impact. Panu, I don't know if you want to add something there.
Yeah. So the difference when you actually go from very rough resolution to detailed resolution, there's also the big difference that you see things that you didn't see before, right? So you just can't consider some things which are still material, like for example ceilings. Do I have to have a ceiling, everywhere in my building? No, like every space in a building doesn't have to have a ceiling, right? Because you don't have same acoustic needs everywhere, and you cannot consider all of these detailed things just cognitively in the early phase, and it's not appropriate to do so either, because you don't have your space plans and you don't have these things which connect to it. So I think it's critical to keep going at it until not necessarily to the very end of the construction drawings, but pretty close to that, right? Because of you just come to the practical choices, right? Then you come to the tangibles. Then you don't get anymore into the big orientations, but you have so many smaller decisions, and if you don't look at the smaller decisions at all, you're gonna miss out a lot of cost reduction opportunities as well, because that's where you can actually save a lot of material costs, because like ceilings, they cost way more than concrete per ton. Just the thing, right? Like simple as that.
Next up from Maria. How does AECOM and the industry promote the adoption of emerging low carbon materials crucial for 2050 climate targets? And what steps are being taken to accelerate their optimization and introduction into larger scale projects? Ida, this is all you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Actually, Panu might step in here too, because the materials compass is one of the tools that we're looking at to help us with making better decisions there. But yeah, I think this is a key part of the ScopeX approach, right? Materials is one of the major levers that we have to reduce carbon in the project. So being able to have regionally specific information that's appropriate for the projects that we're working on, that's really part of the responsibility that we're taking on as engineers. And that's also why it's so important to transition from having all of these decisions made by sustainability professionals and educate our engineers so that they can make those better decisions and have the crucial conversations with those that are specifying materials. Different clients, especially government clients, have very specific requirements. Sometimes we don't have a lot of wiggle room and specifying different materials. So that means that engaging in other contexts, so like with government research projects or with industry organization, to really have those conversations before the RFP is issued, so that there's a little bit more room for us to make those suggestions. That's critical, I think, to accelerate it. Panu, interested in any additional thoughts you have there?
Obviously we are data and software providers. So for us, like if you can't compute it, you can't consider it, right? And that's kind of a problem, because many of these emerging materials, they are made by small companies. They don't all operate at yet scale, and they don't necessarily all have capability to produce reliable data. So what we do for this kind of stuff is we produce our own generic data sets, which you can then use for all sorts of different alternative and or emerging materials, and as well as just lower carbon alternatives that may be more readily available, but maybe you don't have a supplier next to you. So if you can just say, these are my performance criteria, maybe you can get somebody to supply you. So that's how we look at it from the data perspective. So we put the data there when no supplier is capable of doing so.
Next up. Okay, Maria asks, can the One Click LCA database be extended to include emerging construction materials? What are the limitations or obstacles that current tools face when dealing with novel products still in the process of upscaling and standardization? Very interesting, Panu, you just sort of approached this topic, but maybe you could explain at length.
Yeah, so we do produce that data, right? So we do put that data into the platform. Not every week new emerging materials, they don't emerge that fast, right? But definitely every month we release some new alternative data like this. And obviously getting the plausibility of the manufacturing process right is critical. So if the manufacturing process doesn't work, then it's pretty difficult to assess it. So we do that for materials which we know that can be made industrially, or at least a smaller industrial scale. So for everything that's that scale, then we allow customers to input in their own data, but obviously we don't take any responsibility whether that's plausible or not.
I think we have another question. Are there any further questions? I don't see any popping up on screen, so I think this is my cue that there are no more questions. So thank you to both of you. Hey, I think the two of you are just legends. I don't know, you both have like 2 decades of experience, and it's amazing actually to have this conversation with both of you. So thank you, Ida and AECOM, and thank you, Panu, very much. At One Click LCA, we're always happy to hear from you. If you'd like to contact One Click LCA or learn more at your leisure, you can visit oneclicklca.com. We also have a wonderful LinkedIn and YouTube channels with a lot of educational resources, so you can stay up to date with the latest industry-tailored sustainability and decarbonization resources. And with that, thank you for joining the program. Any final word, Ida? Any final word, Panu, before we say goodbye to our audience?
Well, thanks for working with us, right? You're mute.
We might have some technical difficulties on Ida's side. We can't hear that farewell, but thank you to everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time.